So let's take a closer look at human adulthood. People are aware of the fact that adulthood isn't so much a quantity thing where your body gets to a certain age and you are a human adult, but it's more a quality thing. You develop, you grow, you change, and you can be this thing called a human adult. The concept was introduced by Jed McKenna in his Enlightenment trilogy, especially in the second book. And in that book he also says, enlightenment isn't that interesting. If you want to go for anything, go for human adulthood. So you have people reading those books and deciding he's right, let's not be greedy here and go for human adulthood instead of enlightenment. And now they're walking around saying, okay, well, how do I get to be this human adult? And they're searching the web, looking for answers, saying, okay, well, what is this human adulthood, right? How do I become this human adult? Now, the first issue that you have to deal with when it comes to anything, but especially human adulthood, is that we're dealing with words here. And especially in the spiritual game or the philosophy game, we have concepts that are huge, that mean a lot, and we all throw them around like we know what they mean, and we use them with each other without kind of explaining to each other what it means. So I would say the clarity of concepts is very important. It's very important between the people that are communicating, but it's also even more important for yourself, right? I want to be a human adult. Okay, what is a human adult? Right? When we talk about enlightenment or we talk about human adulthood, we talk about the ego, we talk about non-attachment, we talk about disidentification with the ego, right? So we throw around a lot of these concepts that really have no meaning. And I think that is the bigger danger than having the wrong meaning, in the sense that we hear those words and we start using them as part of our lingo, as if we know what they mean, but we don't know what they mean, because we haven't thought about it ourselves. We haven't integrated those concepts within ourselves. So we ask, okay, right, to be a human adult, I need to disidentify with the ego. Is that correct? Right? We don't know what we're saying. Disidentify with the ego. What do you mean? People ask questions, they talk, but they use what I would call dead words. They use words that have no meaning to them. They just pick them up and use them thinking, they're looking in the right direction, but really confusing themselves and really confusing the one they're talking to. Because this other person is listening saying, well, yeah, I know what you mean, the ego. But they both don't know what they mean, or one of them doesn't know what he means. So he's talking like he knows, because he's mentioning the ego, and the other person is replying like the ego is this given thing where we all know what we're talking about, but we don't know. So clarity of concepts is very important, and it's important for you to realize for yourself what it is you mean. And this also has to do with, okay, so you want to be a human adult. Why? Why do you want to be a human adult? Apparently, you're not happy with what you're being right now, and you feel like there's something else you could be that would make you happy. Let's just say it like that, right? But you don't know what the other thing is, so you're looking for answers, but you do know you're not that, and you also suppose you know what it is it will give you, or what it will have in store for you. So that's a really awkward situation, right? You're chasing this thing without understanding it, but knowing what it will give you or what it kind of means to have it, right? And I get why that is so, right? You have people talking, saying, it's great, I'm a human adult, man, it's awesome, I'm so confident and I'm so happy with myself, or whatever. And especially with human adulthood, it's a thing, because the whole essence of human adulthood, so to say, and I will get to explaining what I think human adulthood is that it has to do with some sort of independence. So if you're trying to live up to my idea of human adulthood, well, that kind of clearly shows you're not a human adult. And that's one of the most essential things of this talk that I could say, because I'm talking about concepts now, and I want to look at more of a model approach, more of a logical approach than just talking. The most important thing is that you internalize this concept for yourself. You cannot talk about adulthood if it's external to you. You cannot be an adult if you need an external validation of that adulthood. Okay? You need to figure it out for yourself. You could say with you in adulthood, and maybe with other things too, that really understanding it, really seeing it for what it is the same thing as being able to be that. Meaning, until you truly understand what you're saying, you're just talking about it. You're just saying human adulthood, ego, disidentification, non-attachment, blah, blah, blah. But you don't know what you're saying. And the moment you know what you're saying and you're talking about it because you understand it, you realize that words don't suffice to talk about it. It has no reality to it, right? It's just talking. I'm just saying stuff. And that stuff will never tell you what I really think. And even if I were able to really express in a good way what I'm thinking, it has really no meaning for you because it's just me talking. And what is really important for you to understand is that if you look at someone else to define your terms for you, then they become your new problem, right? I was brought up with my school and my parents and all these things, and they gave me this model that does not sit well with me. So I'm looking for a new model. And now I find this guy who wrote some books, or I find some guy who's on YouTube, and he's talking in a way that I think is more correct. So now, instead of trying to lean on this external source of authority that I used to lean on, I'm not going to switch where I'm leaning on. And I'm going to say, no man, these people don't know. It's the guy writing the books who knows. Right? Well, not right, because that's why you're asking questions, because it's not feeling right. You're now leaning on this concept that somebody put out there that really has no meaning for you. And you want to have it to have meaning. You need it to validate you. You want to be an adult, because if you're an adult, this means something to you, right? Now you can say, look, I'm an adult. So it's a very dangerous game to listen to other people and pretend like they know something you don't or can't. And it will always lead to the fact that either you get disillusioned, which is a good thing, or you start doing the work internally. Because really all the books and all the videos and all the talking in the world can only serve as inspiration to you. And unless you take what is said as a starting point for you to get to work, it's never going to work out for you. You can't watch video after video, you can't read book after book and expect to get anywhere for you, right? You need to take it, break it, and remake it. There's no point in an answer. The answer is not your solution. It's being able to do the math that will get you to where you want to go. So in order to make this a little bit more of an objective approach to human adulthood, let's try to get some clarity of concepts here. So we can look at one, what are we talking about, or what am I talking about, because you need to figure it out for yourself. And then secondly, how do I see this human adulthood developing? So the first thing I would say about human adulthood is that you have to define what it is. And if I were to define human adulthood, it is a human that is in line with its own being. It's being in line with what you are, right? Not who you are, but what you are. The way I see it is that there's this thing going on. This awareness is going on. I can't stop it. It's there. Secondly, it has a huge tendency to look at friction. It is looking for trouble. Not because it wants it, but because it doesn't want it. And it focuses on what it doesn't want, because it wants to avoid that at all costs. And so you get to the situation where not the actual danger or the actual unfolding of the situation where you believe there to be danger is what I'm dealing with, but I'm dealing with the anticipation of the actual thing unfolding. And so danger is a word that describes a situation where there is no situation to deal with yet, but it might unfold. And you could say that your whole being, your whole body, your whole sensing is geared to danger. It is looking for what's wrong. And that is non-stop friction. Again, it's going on and you can't stop it, right? And if you are looking for a state where you will float through the air and this machine that you're a part of is not doing that, then I believe you're in a futile attempt. You're doing something that will never work out for you. So to me, human adulthood means being in line with the thing that you are. Now, ego is interesting, because what is ego? Now, I think you could look at ego in two ways. It's the function and it's the content of the function. So on the one hand, ego is identity, meaning you as a aware being identifies with yourself. You have this mechanism in yourself that separates you from the rest, right? You become this individual, right? So we hear what we hear, we see what we see, and we say, okay, I identify myself as I stop here and I start here, or whatever, right? We say, this is me. We have this idea about what we are. That's the, you could say, the natural ego, right? Me as a thing. Secondly, there's this ego that has to do with a judgment about that thing, right? So what I'm doing is right. What I'm feeling is correct. I am good. I am this. I am that, right? I am identifying with being a certain music lover, or I'm having a certain group of friends, or I have a certain hobby or skill that I identify with. I have a job, I have kids, I have a certain diet, right? We identify the content of this thing that we are is saying, I'm this. This ego is a very tricky word, right? Ask yourself, does your ego have a conscious, or does your conscious create the ego? It's a big difference, but we don't talk about what that is. Now I want to take a look at what I call the matter flow model, which I've talked about before, and which I use for myself to understand certain things. And I want to take you through that model and look at it from this idea of human adulthood. So I've drawn some things on the board, which hopefully you can read well, and I want to take a look at it. I've written some stuff around it, but this is the actual model. It's just this. Where the width of the model represents a freedom of action, meaning what are you allowed to do and what are you capable of doing, right? Now you could say that you're always capable of doing everything, but the way you are brought up limits what you will actually feel is able for you to do. So your freedom of action starts out really wide, becomes very narrow, and becomes wide again. This is basically a development model that goes for any skill you develop, right? Whenever you engage with a new skill, like being a human is a skill, first you just play around with the skill, you like playing around with the skill, and somewhere along the way you kind of wake up to, hey, I could be better at this, right? You become aware and you say, hey, wait a second, there's actually people doing this that are really good at it, and I want to be like them, right? I want to be better at this. And the moment you say, I want to be better at this, you stop playing around. You get serious. You say, okay, well, in order for me to be better, I need to do something. So instead of just doing whatever, I need to confine myself. Now, when you're talking about a human developing in the world, he doesn't consciously say this is what happens, right? You wake up, you're a baby, you're doing whatever the hell you want to do. You're peeing, you're pooping, you're crying, you're doing whatever. And as you get older, people start saying things. You shouldn't do this. Hey, don't touch that, don't put that in your mouth, don't pee in my face, right? We're saying things that are trying to limit the actions that you're taking. And as you're waking up to this, you're saying, okay, well, I want to be part of this group, right? I'm entering this group, I don't know what's going on here, so let me get in line with what they're expecting me to do. So I'm narrowing my actions in order to be validated, right? There is this label, this external definition of what I am, which could be the same for developing a skill, right? I want to be a good football player, I want to be a good basketball player, I want to be a good poker player, whatever. But in order to be that, there are certain rules, right? If I take shots with basketball and I miss them all, nobody's going to say I'm a good basketball player, and not going to believe that I'm a good basketball player. So in order to be a good basketball player, I need to hit my shots. And in order to be able to hit my shots, I need to practice. And as I'm practicing, I'm discovering there's these laws of nature that help me make my shot, right? If I aim correctly, I have more chance of hitting the shot. If I give the ball the good arch and it approaches the basket from a higher position, then it's a wider gap for the ball to go through, and I have a bit of a better chance of making my shot. So there's all these rules I have to start acting in line with in order to be what I want to be, right? Practicing. And as we practice, what we find out is that there's very little room for us. There's very little room for being yourself, right? So you're a child, you're growing up in the world, and you get limited and limited and limited by everybody around you. Your parents, your schooling, maybe your friends, everybody's saying this, that, or the other thing is what you need to do. And this is where you start feeling this friction. This is where you start feeling this resistance. Because yes, on the one hand you want to be validated, but on the other hand, it's very tiring to have this external will. It's not your own will, it's someone else's will. And you don't even know whose will it is, because we've told you, well, this is society, this is how we do things. Okay, well, who's saying we should do this, right? Who can I argue with about this is how we do things? Well, you can't, you just need to get along. So you're changing yourself, you're molding yourself, and it's starting to feel uncomfortable. And as things start to feel uncomfortable, you want to look for a way out, right? You stop identifying with what they told you to identify with. And what most people do, and that's kind of where the trouble begins, but trouble is okay, so don't worry about it, is that they start messing around in this funnel where they're becoming less and less themselves. They're less free to do whatever. They need to comply to this idea about how they should act. And they start feeling this friction, and they start feeling that they have very little room to move. They have very little room to be themselves, and they start looking for another way. Right? And you could say that if you're looking for human adulthood, that's exactly what you're doing. You're saying, well, this way of living, I don't like it. I want to be this human adult, so I'm free, right? But in a way, you're saying, I want to get freedom. Like I want to take it away from something. I want somebody else to give me freedom. I want somebody else to explain to me how to be free, which is a very weird way of being free, right? If you need someone else to make you free, then that freedom is not really free. So you're here and you're feeling the friction and you want out. You say, okay, I want a different identity. I want a different set of rules, because the current rules I don't like, right? So you're in high school, you're doing your thing, you don't like this. Maybe you're like into sports and you're doing the sports thing and you get tired of it. You got to practice every day, you have to win, people are judging you, whatever. So you say, okay, screw this. I'm gonna hang with the cool kids that, don't do sports and don't care about school. They just hang around and do nothing. Okay, well, there's a lot less rules, so that feels better, but still there are rules. Still, you're supposed to wear black clothing and don't care, right? And if you do care, you're not doing the thing we're supposing you should do. So whatever identity you look at, it has this set of rules, this external validation, right? In order to be part of what we are, in order for you to carry around this identity, you need to behave in a certain way, or you cannot identify as that thing. So what you see is that in this path of the development, you are formalizing. You are becoming this thing that complies to the rules. And this doesn't feel right. It makes you feel uncomfortable. So you start looking for new rules. And that's where the trouble starts, because whatever set of rules you find, they're still external to you. Now, if you want to talk about human adulthood, you talk about breaking through this point, breaking through the friction, coming to a point where you say, I am not validated by outside authority, I want to be my own authority. And this is a very tricky thing, because where do you get the authority? Where do you get the balls to be your own boss, right? Where do you get this idea that you could decide what you are? That's very tricky. And you could say that in order for you to be able to do that, you have to walk the route that is required to be able to do that. Meaning, you can't, because if you break through and you become to this adult area, you start to improvise instead of formalize. But you have to understand that improvisation is something that comes with skill, meaning you can't improvise if you don't have skill. And in order to get skill, you need to first formalize. So you have to do the things to be the thing you want to be before you can decide not to be that and move through it and improvise, right? If you look at painters through the years, they've always developed their skills in what was at that point the way you should develop your skills. And after messing around with that for a few years, however long, they decided, I'm done with this. I'm going to have this new approach. And so they started doing something different, right? They took their formal training and turned it on their head. And now they're the new formal training for the next painter to get in line with. And so that's how they keep developing what painting was, or what was revolutionary, or what made a great painter, right? And that's the same thing with this, is that you have to have skill in order to break the rules. You can't just break the rules. So it's really interesting that the adult comes from the child that is formalizing and then breaks through its formalization. You can't just skip the child and say, I'm an adult. And I think in the end, what you realize, and we'll take a look at that, is that you're always a child. I mean, the child is part of what the adult is. It's the adult sprang from the child. It doesn't kill the child. So, to summarize in a way, you could say that there's the child who is developing. It's dependent on external validation. There's this label, there's this external definition, and it tries to comply with that definition. It doesn't feel good to do that, and in the end, it needs to find a way out. And that could be to restart this process in a different identity, which just means you're free to learn the whole thing all over again. And your freedom of action actually increases when you find a new identity, because you give yourself leeway, and the people that you join give you leeway to make mistakes, because you're just new, you're just a child. And as you get older and older, or you start practicing, again, the limitation starts coming in, and you need to get in line with what is expected of you. Finally, you're tired of that, you burn out, and you break through, and you get into the adult area, which has to do with internal validation, or you could even say with no validation, because you realize that the whole validation thing is nonsense. And what I think is the essence of this whole idea is that the child focuses on the message and the adult focuses on the medium, right? The child asks himself, who am I? The adult asks himself, what am I? Right? I have thoughts and feelings. What's important? The fact that I have those and that they influence me, or what the contents of those thoughts and feelings are, right? The child says, no, what I feel and what I think is very important. It's the content of what's going on. The adult says, no, it doesn't matter. It's the functioning of this thing. And you will have thoughts and feelings, and they will play with your being. But that's what's going on, and you can't stop it. So don't judge it. Don't say these are good, these are bad, right? And what happens is if you do that, you come into this, what I call the see-through way of being, where you're not needing to have specific thoughts and feelings. You're not giving yourself a set of rules saying, I have to have these kind of thoughts, I need to feel these kind of feelings. But you're saying, no, there's validation just by being, and whatever happens is what happens. And the interesting thing is, when you do that, and you really do that, this whole thing solves itself in the way that if you don't believe your thoughts and feelings, they have very little meaning. And so, even though you can't stop those thoughts and feelings, they get a lot less intense, because there's very little validity behind them, right? If you see the smoke for what it is, then you can kind of get to look through it, because it's just smoke. It's Maya, right? It's a smoke screen. It's not real. There's no reality in it. And that's the big perspective change, you could say, between the child and the adult. The child wants to conform and feels everything's important and real, and the adult goes through that because he's burned out in this idea and knows it's just something there to play with, and there's really no meaning unless he gives the meaning to it. And in essence, what you could say is that the child is resistance. it's the state thinking. Thinking in I need to be a certain thing. Which that exact way of approaching the subject creates the resistance that you're trying to fight. Right? Resisting to your current state creates a state of resistance. And the adult is the acceptance, which is more of a pattern of thinking. You're not looking for a state. You understand that feeling comes from fluctuation. It's vibration. It's thinking this and then thinking that. It's feeling so and then feeling in another way. And feeling is not the state of feeling. It's the movement between the states, so to say, right? You don't feel warm or you don't feel cold. You feel becoming more warm. You feel becoming more cold, right? Everything that you feel dissipates if you keep feeling the same thing, right? If you just put your hand on your arm, you will stop feeling it in a while. But if you keep moving it, you keep feeling it. But if you keep moving it in the same way, you stop feeling that as well in a way, right? So it has to do with contrast. It has to do with change. It's not being something and then being that. And I think for myself, what was the interesting realization is that the adult doesn't remain the adult in the sense that it's constantly validating itself, internally saying, I'm the adult, because what you're doing is, again, externalizing the rules for being. Well, I should feel like I'm validating myself, or otherwise I'm not an adult. No, that's not how it works. You get to the no validation where you're going in a pattern between these things, meaning you approach things as a child. You approach things as a child to play with them and learn with them. And then you go to the adult where you improvise with them and you allow things to be. So you seek resistance and allowance and you go between those, because that's where life is. It has to do with the development of skill, but it also has to do with being in the world, right? I could be completely disengaged, right? Be the monk on the mountain, meditate in your cave. Oh, look at me. I feel nothing. I'm completely disengaged. I have non-attachment. Okay, how long do you think that will be fun? Contentment is overrated, right? So you engage. You let this thing that you are engage. You let this being that you are engage with what's going on. You make it real, and then you disengage, and you make it unreal, and you make it real, right? I think a problem of spirituality and perhaps also philosophy is this one-sidedness in it. This idea that you need to solve your puzzle so it is solved. But the fun is in solving the puzzle. That's what you are. You are a body and a mind. That is one thing. The feeling and the thought is one thing. And to change your mind so you don't feel anything, there's no point. There's nothing to gain, right? Play with it. Have fun with it. Enjoy it. That's what this is. Play with your feelings, and in order to be able to do that, you don't take them that serious. And that's what you could say is human adulthood. It gets in line with this idea of what it is. It accepts the fact that it has thoughts. It accepts the fact that those thoughts are oriented towards friction, but it also accepts that life is friction. Friction is feeling. It's neither good nor bad. It's just feeling. Sex is friction. Pain is friction. It's all friction. But there's different amounts of pain and there's different results to that pain. So don't judge pain. Don't avoid pain. Learning is pain, and that's great. So be open to that. Anyway, hopefully this is helpful, and thank you very much.